Welcome, orphaned by tragedy viewers, to the show where we won't answer your burning questions, like, does the existence of the Berlin Wall in Mario Kart 8 imply that communism fell in the Mushroom Kingdom? I mean, honestly, I think at this point the real burning question is why the camera setup keeps changing. It's okay, we like to try new things here. Now eat that beef with broccoli, we're trying new things. I don't know where I pulled that out of. Welcome to Cartoon Gateway, the show where I talk about the average trials and tribulations of a cartoon fan. I'm your host, David Hollander. I've spent most of my time on this show talking about shows I like, shows that I recommend, and shows that I'm betting my audience has watched. So with that in mind, why haven't I talked about too many animated sitcoms? You see these everywhere, they've existed since the 80s, probably before too, so why not talk about them? Well, unlike with my half-hour action cartoons video, there's really wasn't a lot to say about them in terms of evolution. This is a genre that hasn't done a lot of evolving since its inception. The fact that The Simpsons is still airing should be proof of that. So what could I even talk about? Maybe rivalries in the genre, but that's mostly just Family Guy and Simpsons writers running up to each other with baseball bats, and here comes South Park with the chair! If you haven't noticed, there's not a lot to talk about when it comes to animated sitcoms, especially when the conversation just drifts easily into talking about adult animation, which I've said before could use a different name. Adult animation sounds indecent, like I'll end up on a watch list for even looking at it. Then again, maybe that's why the name is perfect. No idiot parent is gonna show their kids Border Town if we make it sound like it's something even they should be ashamed of. Which is somewhat true, because I mean, it's Border Town. So maybe an episode on animated sitcoms is too little to cover in one place. Do I need to add variety to my content? Of course not. I could just talk about the only thing that matters in a sitcom, at least according to the 2017 DuckTales show, which is to say, that thing everyone has. Opinions? No, silly, a family. What about orphans? You mean the familially impaired. It's a theme, it's a noun, it almost never looks the same. It's a threat. It's family. Why are we wasting time talking about the way animation falls short of God's ideals by making more Family Guy, when we could just talk about the ways animation portrays families throughout? Some of the tropes associated with different roles in the family, and how we portray various kinds of families throughout American animation. Why did you specify American animation? I'm getting to that, you absolute sod. Let's start with the typical model, the nuclear family in animation. That model America just can't seem to let go of. Mom and dad and 2.5 kids. How does one have half a kid? Chernobyl. There's a reason they're called the nuclear family. This is the model that sitcoms have used since the dawn of television. There's at very least one girl and one boy. For some reason, the boy is usually the older one, or at least it's so much the common case that I watched Family Guy for 5 seasons before realizing Chris was meant to be younger than Meg, even though there's evidence to the contrary of that throughout the early seasons. And sometimes there's a baby, in which case gender doesn't really matter because babies are almost always props when used in television. Disclaimer, don't use your babies as props. I'm pretty sure that's a criminal offense in most cases. And that's the model most often used by cartoons, sitcoms or otherwise. Even cases where the familial connections aren't quite that concrete, like King of the Hill. Hank and Peggy are the parents, Bobby is the son. And even though Luann is technically Hank and Peggy's niece, she still fills much the same role as that the daughter plays in animation. The general role played by sons and daughters in animation generally depends on the individual character. Steve Smith and Bart Simpson are 2 different characters, even though they both occupy the son space. But there's a bigger conversation about gender roles to be had in this whole thing, and I'm the furthest thing from an expert in that field, so let's just put a pin in that and move on. Now, thanks to years of Simpsons influence, we've been stuck with this model in animation for years. Basically, every plagiarism of a different plagiarism that's come since has used this model. And since The Simpsons was originally being all satirical, pretty much all of the traits that it established were negative or derisive ones. That turned out to be problematic since, as we've established, The Simpsons was as influential as that one man we all know. So most of American animation started using those traits unironically. And now multiple generations have been raised to believe that family is awful. Rightfully so, in some cases, I'm aware. Most of these things are exaggerated, you know. The fat, lazy, idiotic dad. The mom who's either a neurotic control freak who hates her family or is a total ditz because woman. And the kids almost always take after the parent of their respective gender, hence why Lisa is the smart one in The Simpsons, or why Chris Griffin is just his dad with a baseball cap. And then there's the dysfunction. Even the good families in cartoons are completely, absolutely mental. The Wattersons from The Amazing World of Gumball, wholesome as they are still absolutely a textbook dysfunctional family. And admittedly, it's hard to really frame that as a bad thing. Oh, in real life, sure, yeah, that's a bad thing. But in cartoons, that kind of inability to function is played almost entirely for comedy. It's a bit depressing that we as a society have basically normalized and desensitized ourselves to portrayals of familial dysfunction to the point where even when shows try to portray it as a serious issue, we just absolutely don't care. But on the other hand, Homer Simpson can beat his child without the show getting banned. That's not a good thing. Why did I start this talking with myself gimmick? I don't have the ID, at least last I checked. Now, the nuclear family isn't the end-all be-all in animation, and you can thank a growing number of people in the field who grew up in any other kind of household. But the nuclear family is just one thing, much like blood, which is another thing. Speaking of things, the found family trope. That's a heartwarming thing worth talking about when individuals of different origins and backgrounds choose their own family beyond just the chewy blood ones. You see these everywhere in cartoons. Lilo and Stitch for one, and even cases of biological family can count, including the DuckTales reboot. You sometimes get mixes of this, like the Smith family in American Dad. Roger has no blood relation to the family, but he's called a Smith, and not many people are seriously going to argue with you if you say Roger is part of the family. It's also super common in action shows. It's a weird subtype of found family, where warriors forge a bond greater than blood in the crucible of battle. It's incredibly common, though I'll admit it doesn't always work from an emotional standpoint. Honestly, it depends on the show. But one show I've seen that actually earned the whole "you're not just friends, you're a family." Yeah, that whole thing was Transformers Prime. Part of that's because there's a lot of different angles you can come at it from. I think it's pretty universally agreed upon that Ratchet is the grandpa of the group, the kind that's all gruff and shouty but cares about people regardless. Bumblebee is basically the little brother, the kind that can be a rascal, who knows when to get serious, but everyone else struggles to take him seriously because they see him as a munchkin. Bulkhead is literally just Miko's war veteran dad. The show's best episode revolves entirely around that subtext. Wheeljack is Miko's war veteran uncle, but the cool one. RC is the mom friend, etc. I could go on, but I won't. And on top of that, the characters work off each other in an action setting. My point is the show earns it. But that's all found family and the dysfunctional stuff, the former of which is the result of the latter, and the latter, I'm led to believe, is a minority in real life. But surely real families aren't like that, right? Obviously nobody's as insane as animated sitcom families. If your family is anything like the Griffins, I'm pretty sure Child Protective Services has already dealt with you and the FBI is your parents in custody. What about the normal family? Or more accurately, what everyone wants to be the normal family, the good ones. Families where there isn't really dysfunction, and conflicts in the show come from sources outside of the family, leaving the people who love each other to just be people who love each other, and not just victims of each other and themselves, like the Griffins. I'm insulting Family Guy a lot. Maybe I shouldn't burn too many bridges. After years of Homer choking Bart being the norm, there's been a number of creatives who want to set actual examples for people, and depict genuinely heartfelt family dynamics. Siblings that aren't always plotting each other's murder, parents that are there for their kids, that kind of thing. There's a growing number of positive families in animation, which you'd think wouldn't be that notable, but since we've put up with 40 years of dysfunction, I think we've earned a break. I get it. We want to see good families because it can be therapeutic. Personally, I grew up in a if you explain yourself, you're arguing and you're the problem household. I just thought that was a phase every family went through, because that's just how we were like for a few years. I didn't have cameras in everyone else's homes, nor an NSA partnership. So my only knowledge of other families outside of mine were cartoons, and it took little old me ages to figure out that what I had wasn't normal. There's obvious value in more wholesome families in cartoons. You can just call them functional families. Listen here, you little cretin. For instance, there's the Malto family, as featured in Transformers Earthspark. I could go on and on about the found family aspect of the show, but I want to focus specifically on Dot and Alex Malto, the parents. It really stuck with me when I watched the show that these two are practically made for each other. Look, my internal thoughts went something like this. Oh, two parental figures in a cartoon family that actually love each other and act like a real married couple, and don't have relationship drama over every slightest thing. Okay, what are you up to, Hasbro? Am I being pranked? Do I have to employ the right to bear arms? I think it speaks to how oversaturated dysfunctional families are in animation when I see a perfectly healthy couple and my immediate reaction is suspicion. I'll shut up about Transformers now, just something worth considering. You even see this somewhat in cases of dysfunctional families. The first show I could think of that managed to successfully balance the comedy of a dysfunctional family while still having the family convincingly love each other was Bob's Burgers. The Belchers are remarkably sweet in spite of their flaws. The relationship between the parents is surprisingly well written, the kids aren't constantly bickering to the point where it's absurd, etc. And the same can be said of the amazing world of Gumball, the Wattersons. In particular, Gumball and Darwin are likely the best example of brothers in animation. There's bros and there's brothers. These two are brothers. And you basically can't talk about wholesome families in cartoons without bringing up Bluey. Does this count as American animation, my field of expertise? The show's Australian, but hey, it's still really worth talking about. You've probably seen the Healer family everywhere, especially on TikTok, and they serve as my eternal proof that seeing an even slightly nice family in a cartoon is therapeutic, because the amount of adults that watch Bluey just because they didn't have healthy households growing up is staggering. I'm convinced more adults looking to heal their inner child watch the show than actual children. Oh my God, the Healer family. I just got that, and I know it's like, you know, the species of dog, but like, I mean, come on. I'll keep this brief, but Bandit and Chili are some of the best parents I've ever seen, fictitious or otherwise. I've heard them called perfect parents, and I mean, they're still flawed characters, but I stand by that they're definitely perfect parents. Bandit makes small blunders all the time, but he learns, and he's a saint for how much he does for his kids. And Chili is still allowed to lose her temper once or twice, but she still handles her frustration in healthy ways, which you don't usually see in cartoon moms. And if you're not convinced yet, Bandit is an archaeologist and Chili is an airport security officer. Their jobs are digging things up and sniffing them out. They even have the perfect jobs for dog parents. Seeing happy, functional families is refreshing. Turning negative tropes on their heads is refreshing. But to end this episode, I want to talk about possibly the most refreshing depiction of a family unit in animation I've seen. To be clear, I usually do not cover anime on this show for reasons I will keep to myself, but Spy Family has to be one of the most interesting recent takes on the family unit in animation, conforming to lesser seen family tropes while also subverting several. Side note, Japan has a weird relationship with the letter X. Sometimes it's pronounced Spy X Family, and worse, sometimes X is pronounced like cross, so I've heard Spy Cross Family, which sounds like an agenda from a genre breeding camp, so I'll just be sticking with Spy Family if it's all the same to everyone else. I'll be quick about the summary, but Spy Family takes place in a fictional, vaguely European 1960s setting in which the world's best spy needs a fake family for a mission, so he adopts a temporary child and finds a woman to pose as his wife. Unbeknownst to him though, that wife happens to be a professional assassin. And unbeknownst to both of them, the little girl they're looking after can read minds and knows both of their secret lives. Understand that I specialize in American animation, but this show's separation from American cultural norms means it had the opportunity to explore family roles unique from the Simpsons mold, and it does so incredibly. So let's go character by character, breaking down the interesting ways this show riffs on family tropes and dynamics. First off, Lloyd Forger, the guy who puts the spy in Spy Family, because he's the only spy in the Spy Family. I feel lied to. In contrast to your average cartoon dad over here, Lloyd is the stark opposite of lazy and stupid. He's cunning, intelligent, athletic. He's no Homer Simpson. I'd think of a cartoon dad like that, but I can't. See what I mean? The only times Lloyd is anything but the smartest guy in the room is when he's misinterpreting something, and that only happens because he chronically overthinks things. That's one of the many consequences of his job as a spy. That, and that he's incredibly stoic and emotionally unavailable. In America, these are existing stereotypes of fathers, but they're mostly associated with dads that came from the silent generation than dads of today, which sort of lines up with Lloyd's age in the time period. Even if Lloyd is at the absolute youngest possible point to be considered part of the silent generation. Usually, you don't see this style of dads in cartoons outside of parodies, but Lloyd unironically rocks that outward stoicism. He had a family out of necessity, in this case, literally, for the mission. And I know he said he's not lazy, but where did that stereotype of dads come from in general? Dads crashing on the couch after work and sleeping in front of the family. And why did this come about? Because they were working themselves to exhaustion, and that absolutely fits Lloyd. The guy is extremely overworked. With his whole mission in constant danger of falling apart, his family's existence is technically the greatest source of his stress. but their connection with him is also paradoxically his greatest stress relief, even if he doesn't realize it. Then there's Yor. Yor what? Listen, bucko, you want to be religiously born again because I will make you see God when I shove you up your mother? Yor's name might be a bit strange to English-speaking audiences because it's phonetically similar to Yor. The other two have vaguely Western names, but Yor's, it's a common Japanese name, just clarifying for the linguistically impaired. Yor only ever took up contract killing to provide for her family. Now that just happens to include a husband and child. And like I'm told most women do, she only sought a husband to appear normal. Moms in American cartoons are usually portrayed as hyper-competent, and they're the ones who are always exhausted. But that's Lloyd here, and as for competence, well, Yor isn't incompetent, she's what I'd call anti-competent. Sometimes she's a ditz, but how good at or how much she knows about something is in direct proportion to how much it involves violence, which she's quite good at. Also, while the whole dumb wife cliche is a bit problematic, I should mention that in America, at the very least, it has its roots in Hays Code era cinema. The Hays Code, for those who don't know, was that time where the film industry tried to censor itself before the government could, and then one guy made the whole thing more draconian than anyone wanted. Look, you don't need to know that. This is the era of American comedy that gave us the innuendo, almost always delivered by the oblivious and often dumb woman. Edging on sexist? I mean, kind of, yeah. But it was something that was started as a way for women to be the funny ones. And though not entirely her role, Yor does seem to inherit a lot of that naive comedic innocence outside of her job. I get this is Japan, there's no way that's intentional, but like, I mean, that's a thing. But despite this, she's incredibly loving and protective, even if she's not the smartest. She's a mom in every sense of the word. And what's that thing about moms every kid knows but is too scared to admit? They can be pretty friggin' scary. And you can check off that box. Yor has that down pat. Again, like Lloyd, Yor has the traits of her familiar rolled down even if they stem from somewhere else. And lastly would be Anya, the mind-reading child who knows all about her parents' jobs even if they don't know she knows. The entire reason Anya doesn't tell her parents about what she knows is because she's a kid obsessed with spy TV, so she's just keeping the ride going. And as an orphan, Anya's a bit starved for attention and affection. She views helping her parents and the mission as the key to getting those things, and isn't that how kids normally are anyway? And the show never forgets that despite the powers, Anya's just a kid. She's trying to thwart bomb threats and learning how to read a clock at the same age. And her powers don't really give her any unfair advantages, at least in dangerous situations, because she's just a kid who still doesn't understand things. But what they do allow her to do is be a tad manipulative, which again, in character for a kid with their parents. She keeps her parents from finding out about each other's jobs and her powers. She finessed her entire adoption process. Arguably, Lloyd and Yor might not have ended up together in the first place, if not for Anya deciding, this could be fun. And you know why else Anya's mind reading makes her more like a real kid? Because it emphasizes something we too often forget. 9 times out of 10, kids understand way more of what's going on around them than we think they do. Come on, every kid has that moment where their parent is lying to them, but they figure out the truth anyway. There's this perception that all kids are dumb and don't know anything, perpetuated largely by people in the entertainment industry. But that's simply untrue. While not necessarily intelligent, children can be inquisitive. They can learn stuff behind your back. And if you're a grown-up who was a kid thinking that all kids are dumb, sorry to say, but you were probably just dumb growing up. Lloyd, Yor, and Anya all managed to fit their roles perfectly, not working off of sitcom formula, but real-world trends and phenomena, along with a dash of formula, but the kind that we don't see too often. And to top it all off, thanks to the found family trope, the Forgers are one of the most genuinely sweet families I've seen in animation. Oh, but don't confuse my praise of Spy Family for a recommendation of the series. This show is still an anime and has all the trappings that come with that. The show will swiftly get weird anytime siblings are on screen together because that's funny over in Japan. You know, jokes like that specifically don't always land with American audiences, but cultural norms mess with that. And dubbing can be a bit weird like normal, even if, for what it's worth, Spy Family is one of the best dubs I've ever seen. I have the courage to say that this show would make a good first anime, I guess, for anyone, but I don't have the courage to say that you should watch anime in the first place. Escape, live your life, have a spouse. And with that, we've concluded our discussion on families and animation. We're coming a long way from the rut that The Simpsons dug us, and I hope we see more evolution in this field. Not everyone has the same family experience, or even the same kind of family. And whether they are a reflection of us, or a sign of what could be, family is always going to be an important factor in cartoons. I'm David Hollander, grandnephew of a guy also named David Hollander, and this has been Cartoon Gateway. Tune in next time, where we won't answer your burning questions like, Was the first caveman to hear a parrot speak also the first caveman to develop paranoid schizophrenia?
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.